The gentle hum of the aircraft's engines provided a soothing backdrop to the hushed conversations in the first-class cabin of Pinnacle Airlines Flight 237. The exclusive compartment gleamed with polished wood accents and buttery leather seats, a world away from the cramped economy section further back. Crystal glasses clinked softly as pre-departure champagne was offered to passengers who barely looked up from their devices to acknowledge the attentive crew. Among them, Natalie Chen stood out, not for her designer clothes or commanding presence, but for their absence. At 37, she carried herself with quiet dignity in her simple linen pants and unadorned navy blouse. Her dark hair fell in natural waves to her shoulders, and the only jewelry she wore was a vintage watch with a worn leather strap. It had been a gift from her husband on their first anniversary, a reminder of the value of time over material wealth. The watch was worth more than most people's cars, though you wouldn't know it unless you were a collector. Much like Natalie herself, its true value wasn't immediately apparent to casual observers. She approached the entrance to the first-class cabin, boarding pass in hand. After weeks of organizing a major fundraiser for children's education in underserved communities, she was finally taking a short vacation. James had insisted she travel first class, though she'd protested it was unnecessary. "You deserve every comfort," he'd said with characteristic warmth, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I'll join you tomorrow after I wrap up the Singapore negotiations." At the threshold of the first-class cabin, Natalie was intercepted by Vanessa Drake, the chief purser. Tall, blonde, and immaculately groomed, Vanessa's professional smile didn't quite reach her eyes as she assessed Natalie's simple appearance. "Excuse me," Vanessa said with practiced politeness that barely masked her condescension. "This is the first-class cabin. Economy boarding is through the rear entrance." Natalie smiled, used to such assumptions after 14 years of marriage to James. "I have a first-class ticket," she replied, extending her boarding pass. Vanessa took the pass between manicured fingers, examining it with obvious skepticism. Behind her, a flight attendant named Ryan observed the interaction with a slight frown. "There seems to be some confusion," Vanessa said, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is a premium cabin with seats that cost upward of $12,000. Perhaps you were accidentally upgraded in the system." A middle-aged man in an Italian suit glanced up from his financial newspaper, eyeing Natalie over his reading glasses. "Happens all the time," he remarked to no one in particular. "The system gets overwhelmed during peak season." Several other passengers looked up, some with barely concealed smirks, others quickly returning to their devices to avoid the awkward confrontation. "My ticket is correct," Natalie said calmly, though a flush was beginning to creep up her neck. "Seat 2A was specifically reserved for me." Vanessa's smile tightened as she handed the boarding pass back with obvious reluctance. "Let me check with the gate agent. There might have been an error in the manifest." As Vanessa stepped away to use the cabin phone, a woman dripping in diamonds and wrapped in a cashmere travel set leaned toward her companion. "First class isn't what it used to be," she stage whispered. "They'll let just anyone in these days if the price is right." Natalie's face burned. In 14 years, she'd never gotten used to this. The immediate dismissal, the assumption that she didn't belong in the world her husband inhabited. She'd built her own career before meeting James, working her way up to become head of guest relations for a renowned hotel chain. She understood service and discretion better than most of these passengers ever would. Ryan, the younger flight attendant, approached with an apologetic smile. "Can I help you find your seat while Ms. Drake sorts this out?" Before Natalie could respond, Vanessa returned, her expression now professionally neutral but her eyes cold. "I'm sorry, but there appears to be an issue with your reservation. Economy is quite full, but we'll try to find you a comfortable seat there." A businessman typing aggressively on his laptop sighed loudly. "Some of us have schedules to keep. Can we get this sorted quickly?" Natalie stood her ground, her voice quiet but firm. "There's no issue with my reservation. I'm in seat 2A, first class, as confirmed by my husband who made the booking directly with your corporate office." "Your husband?" the diamond-laden woman echoed with a knowing smirk. "Of course, dear. And is he the President of the United States, perhaps?" Scattered laughter rippled through the cabin. Even Vanessa's professional mask slipped momentarily to reveal a condescending smile. "Ma'am, Vanessa said with exaggerated patience. I understand you believe your ticket is valid, but we have procedures to follow. I'll need to ask you to step aside while we prepare for departure. The cabin director will speak with you momentarily. Natalie felt a familiar wave of frustration rising within her. She could end this charade with a single sentence. I'm Natalie Chen, wife of James Chen, the majority owner of Pinnacle Airlines Group. But she'd promised herself years ago that she wouldn't use her husband's position to demand respect she should be given regardless. The cabin director, a tall man with prematurely gray hair and a serious expression, approached. Is there a problem here? This woman insists she has a first-class ticket, but there seems to be a discrepancy, Vanessa explained, her tone suggesting this was a routine occurrence with delusional economy passengers. The director glanced at Natalie's boarding pass, then consulted his tablet. Ms. Chen. Something flickered in his eyes, recognition perhaps, but his professional training kept his expression neutral. Let me double-check our system. This is ridiculous, the businessman with the laptop interjected. We're already running late. Just escort her back to economy so we can take off. Natalie was about to respond when a new voice entered the conversation. Is there a reason my wife is being prevented from taking her seat? The voice was calm, measured, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority without needing to be raised. Every head turned toward the entrance of the first-class cabin. James Chen stood there, an imposing figure at 6'1" with broad shoulders accentuated by his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. At 43, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to raise his voice to command attention. The silver at his temples added distinction to his otherwise jet-black hair, while his penetrating dark eyes assessed the situation in an instant. A visible ripple passed through the cabin. Several passengers straightened in their seats. The businessman with the laptop slowly closed it. The woman with diamonds suddenly became intensely interested in the safety card tucked into her seat pocket. Mr. Chen, the cabin director stammered, his professional composure fracturing. We weren't expecting you on this flight. Evidently not, James replied, his gaze moving from the director to Vanessa, who had gone very still, her complexion suddenly matching the white of her uniform shirt. I decided to surprise my wife and join her earlier than planned. Now, perhaps someone can explain why Natalie is still standing instead of being seated with the champagne I specifically arranged to have waiting for her. There was a misunderstanding, Vanessa managed, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under a harsh sun. A misunderstanding, James repeated, the words hanging in the air like a verdict. About whether my wife belongs in first class based on her appearance, perhaps? The silence in the cabin was absolute. Even the ambient noise of the aircraft seemed to recede as passengers held their breath. Sir, we were simply following protocol, the cabin director attempted, though his voice lacked conviction. Protocol, James said, the single word somehow carrying the weight of imminent consequences. Is it Pinnacle Airlines protocol to judge passengers by their clothing rather than their tickets? To humiliate customers in front of others? To ignore valid boarding passes because someone doesn't match your preconception of what a first-class passenger should look like? He hadn't raised his voice, yet his words seemed to fill the entire cabin. James moved forward, placing a gentle hand at the small of Natalie's back, a gesture both protective and claiming. Those close enough might notice the platinum wedding band on his left hand, understated yet unmistakably valuable to the knowing eye. Natalie, my love, he said softly, looking only at her now. I apologize for the reception you've received. Turning back to the crew, his expression hardened almost imperceptibly. As the majority shareholder of Pinnacle Airlines Group, I find myself deeply concerned about what I've witnessed here today. The effect was immediate and seismic. A passenger near the window audibly gasped. The businessman with the laptop looked as though he might be ill. The diamond-adorned woman seemed to shrink into her cashmere wrap. Vanessa's professional mask had completely crumbled. Mr. Chen, I had no idea. We didn't recognize. James raised a hand slightly, and she fell silent immediately. That, he said quietly, is precisely the problem. You shouldn't need to recognize my wife to treat her with basic dignity and respect. He guided Natalie toward their seats, but paused to address the cabin director once more. "I'll expect a full report on this incident on my desk Monday morning." Effective immediately, Pinnacle Airlines will be implementing comprehensive anti-bias training for all customer-facing staff. As they settled into their seats, the cabin bustled with renewed activity, crew members scrambling to provide impeccable service while passengers stared resolutely at their devices, suddenly fascinated by their screens. Vanessa approached their seats, her hands visibly trembling as she offered champagne. "Mr. and Mrs. Chen, please accept my deepest apologies for the misunderstanding. If there's anything at all I can do to make your flight more comfortable." "Thank you, but we're fine," Natalie interrupted gently, taking pity on the woman despite everything. Years as a hotel executive had taught her that public humiliation rarely led to meaningful change. After Vanessa retreated, James took Natalie's hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding band. "I should have been here sooner," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you had to endure that." Natalie shook her head slightly. "It's not your fault. It happens more often than you know." James's expression darkened. "It shouldn't happen at all, especially not on our own airline." "No," she agreed. "It shouldn't. But I've learned something over the years. People who judge based on appearances rarely see their own blindness until it's reflected back to them." The flight proceeded in relative calm, though the atmosphere in the first-class cabin remained charged. Service was immaculate, almost painfully so, with Vanessa personally attending to their every need with the desperate thoroughness of someone whose career hung by a thread. The woman with diamonds made a point of introducing herself during the meal service, suddenly discovering they had so much in common, as she had always admired the Chen Foundation's charitable work. The businessman with the laptop found an opportunity to mention his company's potential interest in partnering with Chen Industries. James handled these transparent overtures with practiced grace, neither encouraging nor dismissing them outright. Natalie observed it all with a mixture of amusement and resignation, having seen this pattern repeat countless times over the years. During a quiet moment when most passengers were either sleeping or absorbed in their entertainment, Ryan, the younger flight attendant who had attempted to help Natalie earlier, approached their seats. "Mrs. Chen," he said softly, "I wanted to apologize personally for not stepping in more firmly earlier. It was wrong how you were treated." Natalie studied him for a moment, noting his genuine contrition. "Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that." James looked up from his tablet. "You were the only one who showed my wife basic courtesy before you knew who she was. That speaks to your character." Ryan seemed surprised that James knew his name. "I was just doing my job, sir." "No," James corrected him gently. "You were doing more than your job. You were being decent in a moment when others chose not to be. That matters." After Ryan left, Natalie turned to her husband. "You checked the manifest before boarding, didn't you? You already knew who was working this flight." James's lips curved in a slight smile. "I always do my homework, especially when it involves my wife traveling alone." Natalie shook her head in fond exasperation. "Ever the strategist." "Speaking of strategy," James said, his expression growing more serious, "I've been thinking about something for a while now, and today's events have only confirmed it for me." "That sounds ominous," Natalie replied, raising an eyebrow. "Not at all. Quite the opposite, in fact." He took her hand again, his thumb tracing the worn leather of her watch strap. "Pinnacle needs a chief experience officer, someone with extensive background in hospitality who understands service from both sides of the equation. Someone who knows what it feels like to be dismissed based on appearances, and who won't tolerate it happening to others." Natalie went very still. "James." "It's not nepotism if you're the most qualified person for the job," he continued. "Your work with the Ritz-Carlton set industry standards. You literally wrote the manual on anticipatory service that 3 major hotel chains now use." "I left that world to focus on our foundation," she reminded him. "And you've done incredible work," he acknowledged. "But I've seen how your eyes light up when you talk about transforming customer experiences, about creating systems where every person feels valued. The foundation will always be there, but perhaps it's time for you to reclaim another part of yourself as well." Natalie was quiet for a long moment. She had loved her career in hospitality, The challenges, the constant innovation, the satisfaction of creating seamless experiences that guests remembered long after they checked out. She'd stepped away when James's business had expanded globally, choosing instead to focus on their philanthropic work. It had been fulfilling, but there had always been a part of her that missed the operational side of service excellence. "You've been planning this for a while, haven't you?" she finally asked. James smiled. "The position was approved by the board last month. I was going to surprise you with the offer next week, on our anniversary. But after today." He shrugged slightly. It seemed particularly relevant. The board approved it without knowing who would fill the role. They approved the position based on business need. The candidate would still need to interview and be evaluated on merit. His eyes crinkled with amusement. "Though I doubt any other applicant will have your particular combination of expertise and personal investment in our company's success." Natalie leaned back in her seat, considering the unexpected opportunity. A chance to transform the entire customer journey, from booking to arrival. "Complete autonomy," James added. "Direct report to the CEO, not to me. No special treatment." She raised an eyebrow. "None." "Well," he amended with a smile, "perhaps preferred seating when we travel together. But you'll have earned that on your own merit." As the plane began its descent toward their destination, Natalie gazed out the window at the patchwork of lights below, each one representing lives and stories as complex as her own. How many of those people had been judged, dismissed, or underestimated based on superficial assessments? How many had never gotten the chance to prove their true worth because doors had been closed before they could even knock? "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But if I take this position, there will be changes. Significant ones." "I would expect nothing less," James replied, the pride evident in his voice. 3 months later, Natalie Chen walked through the first-class cabin of Pinnacle Airlines Flight 892, observing rather than participating. As the newly appointed Chief Experience Officer, she had implemented an executive immersion program that required all senior leadership to regularly experience their own service as ordinary passengers would. Sometimes in first class, sometimes in economy, but always incognito. Today, she was dressed simply again in jeans and a light sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. No makeup, no designer accessories. Just another passenger making her way to her seat. Vanessa Drake was working the flight again, though her demeanor had changed markedly since that day 3 months ago. The anti-bias training program Natalie had implemented was rigorous and comprehensive, focusing not just on recognizing bias but on actively countering it through specific behavioral protocols. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," Vanessa greeted Natalie, her smile now reaching her eyes. "May I help you find your seat?" "2A," Natalie replied, watching carefully for any reaction. "Right this way," Vanessa said smoothly, leading her to the same seat where the confrontation had occurred months earlier. There was no skepticism in her expression, no appraisal of Natalie's casual attire. "Can I offer you a welcome beverage? Perhaps some champagne?" "Water would be fine, thank you." As Vanessa moved away to fetch the water, Natalie noticed Ryan assisting an elderly woman with her hand luggage, his manner patient and attentive. He had been one of her first promotions, now a purser in training with a promising future ahead of him. The changes she'd implemented went far beyond mere training. Pinnacle now led the industry in customer satisfaction scores, having introduced a service model that emphasized dignity and respect as non-negotiable elements of the passenger experience. The Invisible VIP program randomly designated ordinary passengers for premium treatment, keeping crew members mindful that everyone deserved exceptional service regardless of their apparent status. Natalie opened her tablet, reviewing the latest customer feedback data. Complaints about discriminatory treatment had dropped by 78% in just 3 months. More tellingly, compliments highlighting extraordinary service had increased across all cabin classes. A distinguished-looking woman in her 60s settled into the seat beside Natalie, her Hermes scarf and understated jewelry suggesting wealth without ostentation. "First time flying Pinnacle?" the woman asked conversationally. Natalie smiled. "No, I'm a frequent flyer. But the experience keeps improving." "Indeed," the woman agreed. "There's been a remarkable transformation recently. My husband sits on the board of a competing airline, and he says they're scrambling to understand how Pinnacle has elevated their service so dramatically. Apparently, it's all due to their new chief experience officer, some hospitality genius who's revolutionizing the industry. Is that so? Natalie replied, suppressing a smile. Absolutely. My husband tried to headhunt her, but apparently, she's deeply committed to Pinnacle's vision. The woman lowered her voice conspiratorially. Between us, I heard she's married to the majority owner. Nepotism, one might think, but the results speak for themselves. Natalie couldn't help but laugh softly. Perhaps she simply found the right place to make a difference. Perhaps, the woman agreed, settling back with her magazine. In any case, I now choose Pinnacle whenever possible. It's refreshing to be treated like a human being rather than a walking wallet or a seat number. As the plane taxied for takeoff, Natalie gazed out the window, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The humiliation of that day 3 months ago had transformed into something powerful and positive. Not just for her, but for thousands of passengers who would never know her name or her story. Her phone vibrated with a text message from James. How's the undercover boss routine going today? She smiled, typing back. So far, so good. No one's tried to escort me to economy yet. His response came immediately. Give it time. Day's still young. Natalie laughed, drawing a curious glance from her seatmate. James understood her in a way few others did. Her need to prove herself on her own merits, her deep-seated belief that true respect had to be earned rather than granted. Vanessa approached with Natalie's water, serving it with a genuine smile. If you need anything at all during the flight, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you, Vanessa, Natalie replied, deliberately using the woman's name. A flicker of surprise crossed Vanessa's face. Have we met before? For a moment, Natalie considered revealing herself, but decided against it. The point wasn't to embarrass or expose. It was to confirm that real change had taken root. I noticed your name tag, she explained simply. You have a lovely smile. Vanessa beamed at the compliment. That's very kind of you to say. Enjoy your flight, ma'am. As Vanessa moved on to the next passenger, Natalie sipped her water contentedly. The true measure of success wasn't how people treated you when they knew your name or status. It was how they treated you when they thought you were nobody special at all. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, pressing Natalie gently back into her seat as it climbed into the sky, rising above the clouds and the judgments of the world below. Up here, in the domain she now helped shape, everyone deserved to feel valued, respected, and welcomed, regardless of the clothes they wore or the watch on their wrist. She touched the worn leather strap of her vintage timepiece, a reminder of what truly mattered. Not the hours spent accumulating wealth or status, but how those hours were used to improve the world around you, one interaction at a time. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Natalie opened her laptop and began reviewing applications for Pinnacle's new scholarship program, designed to help promising students from underprivileged backgrounds pursue careers in aviation and hospitality. The program had been her first major initiative as CXO, funded by a percentage of first-class ticket sales. In a way, every passenger who had ever looked down on someone like her was now unwittingly helping to create opportunities for the very people they might have dismissed. The irony wasn't lost on Natalie as she approved the first round of scholarship recipients. Sometimes, the most powerful response to judgment wasn't confrontation or retribution, but creation. Building something better from the ashes of indignity, something that would outlast the moment and transform the landscape for others who would come after. High above the clouds, far from the superficial metrics that so often determined a person's perceived worth on the ground below, Natalie Chen continued her quiet revolution. One flight, one interaction, one life at a time.